Hello, anybody, and thanks for tuning in to Monday Morning Handicapping. I've been off for a little bit because I like to play the local tracks, as some of you may know, and they're back at Pleasanton, but there's some dispute with the ADWs, the online betting site, so I'm unable to play Pleasanton right now. But as many of you horse racing fans know, the Breeders' Cup is coming up this week at Del Mar, and this is the 2 days of racing where the cream of the crop from around the world comes in for some high purses, some really talented fields. The pre entries are out already, but it's not quite the past performances, so I don't necessarily have a form to really study on yet. So, to pass the time instead of listening to a multitude of podcasts, I decided I would dive into the previous 7 years of Breeders' Cup, starting back when they first ran one at Del Mar in 2017. Just take a look at the races, how they're run, who's winning. Look at the early fractions to get a sense of how the pace scenario may set up in many of the races. I'll dive into that here shortly. Just to set up a little agenda, I'm going to go through my goals for the analysis. I'll show everybody what I performed on my Excel spreadsheet and then come back and sort of let everyone know what I broke down from my analysis. I did this obviously to help myself get an idea of how the races are run and who's winning and whatnot, but to help anyone else who is kind of chomping at the bit to really dive in. Just some food for thought before you actually start handicapping the races. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. Might be a little bit longer of a video, so let's get started. Goals for analysis. Number one, get a glimpse of recent early pace scenarios and Breeders' Cup races, the half mile for sprint and 3/4 for routes. I'm going to go up to those points for those races. So the shorter races, I'll just see how fast they went to the half mile. For routes, up to the 3/4 mark. I want to get a glimpse of how well the horses are carrying their speed throughout the race. So those early splits, are they going out really fast and getting real tired for the next quarter mile, or just how the time differs from quarter to quarter early on. I want to get a sense of the lengths back margin of the eventual winners of the race. So how far back were the winners in each of the races, and I'm going to break them down by dirt sprints, dirt routes, turf sprints, turf routes, and I'm disregarding gender and age. So just across the board, those four scenarios on the dirt, sprinting or routing, or turf sprinting or routing. Get a sense of when favorites and long shots tend to win. Find out which types of races are more conducive to wire winners. So horse goes out, gets the lead, and nobody ends up passing him. Compare and contrast between the Del Mar racetrack, which is where the Breeders' Cup is being held this year, to other tracks that have hosted the Breeders' Cup in the past. Maybe some tracks play faster or slower, more conducive to late closers or speed runners. So we'll take a look at that. I did not include the 2018 Churchill Downs turf races because that turf track was considered yielding, which is very soft. And I don't expect any moisture in the track at Del Mar. It is by the ocean, but it's a temperate 70 degrees year round. So it varies a little bit, but I don't think it's ever been yielding that I know of. And I also did not include the 1.5 mile race on the turf. I just figured that would sort of mess with the fractions a little bit, throw off the averages. So those are two races I did not include: the turf races at Churchill Downs and the 1.5 miles on the turf. So for more information on those, you're sort of on your own. Now, before the breakdown, I'm going to head over to my Excel spreadsheet and show everyone basically how I broke it all down and how I extracted my conclusions. Okay, so as you'll see over in this left column, we have the year of the Breeders' Cup races going back to 2017. We'll have Del Mar in this row, and then 2018 was Churchill Downs, Santa Anita, and so on up to 2023. Down here, I'll break down the average for all the Breeders' Cups up to that point. This is the Del Mar average, so I can compare and contrast all the Breeders' Cup races to how they were run at this track, and they've run it twice before. This will be the third Breeders' Cup ever at Del Mar. First one 2017, the other one 2021. And then down here, I just calculated the difference. Follow my cursor down lower. You'll see I have dirt sprints up here, dirt routes on the next page, turf sprints, then turf routes. So in each of these years, I went back and looked at all the dirt sprints for each of the Breeders' Cup races for each year. I averaged out the quarter mile times for all the dirt sprints at each track, average them out at Del Mar, the quarter mile on average for all the dirt sprints and all the Breeders' Cup races. Again, for all ages, all genders of horses, all distances. So it could be 5.5 up to 6, sometimes 7 furlong sprints. But the average first quarter mile was run in 21.9 for all Breeders' Cups. And then you can look at individual tracks here. And I might put a link to this file in the notes or in the description of this video so you can take a look at it yourself and compare and contrast. If that doesn't work, just send me a message or a comment and I can find a way to get the file to you, but I will try to put the file in the description below. So for the first quarter mile, here's all the averages and then a culmination of those averages. The split, so first quarter mile to the next quarter mile or half mile, the next quarter mile. So up to a half mile, this was the average times of the front runner to the half mile. This split here is the difference between the first quarter mile and the second. So the second quarter mile is running 22.79. The difference between the first and second is indicated here in this split column. So about a second slower at Del Mar in 2017. We'll just focus on the Breeders' Cup average because that's kind of what we're going off of. Breeders' Cup average 0.79 seconds slower for the second quarter mile, again to the half mile. The margin is how far back the eventual winner was on average at the half mile pole. So on average in a dirt sprint, the eventual winner was 2.46 lengths behind the leader at the half mile pole. So a little bit off of the pace on average. Odds of the eventual winner in column G here, an average of 6.35 to 1 were the odds of the winners. So a little bit on the lower end once you get to see the other races, but not super relevant. And column H over here is wire-to-wire winners, 7.69%, or if you follow my cursor, 1 out of 13 dirt sprint winners went wire-to-wire. And down here, 0 at Del Mar. Move over here to the dirt routes. Quarter mile times, an average of 22.84 for the Breeders' Cup. The next quarter mile, 23.57, so a little bit slower, which gives you a half mile time of 46.41. And for routes, we're going to the 3/4 mile. The next quarter mile was 24.36, as indicated by the E column, these splits. And then the 3/4 of a mile time for the leader was 70.77 seconds, also a minute 10 and 77, so close to a minute 11 on average. The split difference, how much slower or faster was this split from the half mile to the 3/4 mile than the quarter to the half mile. So pretty much a gauge of how much are they slowing down. 3/4 of a mile, quarter mile fraction was 0.79 seconds slower than going from the quarter mile to the half mile. The margin at the half mile, again, the eventual winner, how far back were they at the half mile pole? On average, 2.52 or 2.5 lengths back from the leaders at the half mile pole. And I did an adjusted margin because once in a while you'd get some really deep closers, usually with a really hot pace and a meltdown. So I took out the longest or the highest margin, the horse I was furthest back that did end up winning in each one of these years. And so I thought that might give a more accurate representation of where you want your horse to be in these types of races. So if you want to go across the board, the average margin was 2.5 lengths back of the winner at the half mile pole. Take out the outlier and it might be closer to 1.5 lengths back of the leader, again in dirt routes. So it seems like you want a forwardly placed horse for dirt routes. Again, same thing with odds. The average odds of the winner in dirt routes was 7 to 1. Adjusted odds, I took out the big long shots that by some miracle ended up winning, and that reduced the average odds of Breeders' Cup winners to 3.4 to 1. And wire-to-wire winners in dirt routes, 10 out of 34, and 44 or 29% at Breeders' Cup races, 44% at Del Mar alone. Same thing with turf sprints, just going to that half mile. Again, I'll try to share this file in the description. If not, just message me and I can send it to you. Wire-to-wire winners, odds, margins, etc. Same thing with turf routes. So I think you got an idea. Went through all these years of all these Breeders' Cup, looked, averaged out all the times, and this is what I came up with. And now I'm going to head back to my PowerPoint and basically share what I was able to break down going through all my numbers. So first one we're going to look at are the dirt sprints. Average opening quarter mile of all Breeders' Cup races of 21.9. The second quarter mile average 4 lengths slower, a time of 22.69 for that second quarter mile. Again, going from a quarter mile to a half mile into the race, which equates to 0.79 seconds. 4 lengths is, by rule of thumb, a fifth of a second is 1 length, so just about 4 lengths slower. Lots of send and pray. It seems like really fast, but not a lot of wire-to-wire winners, if I recall. So it seems like tons of speed, but they're not always holding in these dirt sprints for the Breeders' Cup. Again, cream of the crop, so even the closers are really talented horses, but dirt sprints just seems like they're trying to send them and just see if anyone can catch them. Average margin of the winner at the half mile pole for dirt sprints was 2.46 lengths, an average of almost a half second behind the leader at the half mile pole. Wire to wire winners only 1 of 13 in all the Breeders' Cup races, 8% in the past 7 years, and none of those wire to wire winners took place at Del Mar. Look for lone speed, otherwise scrutinized based on fractions. Wire to wire winners can occur, but you would expect plenty of front runners in dirt sprints in races of this caliber. So if there's a lone speed, don't overlook it. Otherwise, I would look for someone coming a little bit off the pace if it looks like the lead's going to be contested. So now going over to dirt routes, average opening quarter of 22.84. Second quarter mile is 3.5 lengths slower, 23.57. And the third quarter mile is 4 lengths slower than the second quarter mile with an average time of 24.36. Dirt routes tend to have an honest pace, so they're going pretty quick early, and then they gradually slow down throughout the race. Stocking types seem to do well in these dirt routes. Winner was an average of 2.52 lengths or a half second back at the half mile pole. The adjusted margin back was 1.5 lengths back. So again, throwing out that outlier that came from way behind. And it seems like horses want to be right up near the pace, sitting just off about 1.5 to 2.5 lengths. Wire to wire winners in dirt routes of all Breeders' Cup races, 10 of 34, 29% in the past 7 years. 4 of 9 were, or 44%, were at Del Mar, so pretty notable. See if anyone can wire the field. Happens often in these Breeders' Cup dirt routes. Winners are otherwise generally near the front end of these races. Turf sprints. Average opening quarter of 21.67. Second quarter mile is 4.5 lengths slower, 22.58. Average margin of winner was 2.06 lengths back at the half mile or 3/8 pole, depending on the length of the turf sprint. The second call is either at the half mile or the 3/8 pole, but in the same ballpark. Wire to wire winners, 6 of 13 in all Breeders' Cup races, 46% in the last 7 years. 2 of 5 or 40% were at Del Mar. Longest average Breeder Cup odds occur in turf sprints, 13.9 to 1 on average, 18.6 to 1 at Del Mar. So maybe look for some of your long shot plays that are near the pace in your turf sprints. Average pace in Breeders' Cup turf sprints is faster than the average pace in Breeders' Cup dirt sprints, about a length faster on the turf than the Breeders' Cup dirt sprints. So look for horses that relish turf sprints and can keep up early, have some good speed, and have some decent late kick is what I've surmised. Turf routes. Average opening quarter of 23.03. Second quarter mile is 4.5 lengths slower, 23.96. And the third quarter mile is a half length slower than the second, so 24.11. Turf routes tend to have an accordion pace, so they'll go fast early, slow down in the middle of the race, then they all come charging late, so fast, slow, fast. More favoring to stalking types. That slow middle part of the race kind of lets the stalkers catch up to the leaders, and if they have a better kick, should be able to pass the horses in front. The margin for winners in turf routes is higher at the half mile pole than of dirt route winners. So they're basically coming from further behind in turf routes as opposed to the dirt. 4.17 lengths back or 2.94 adjusted, throwing out that outlier, versus 2.5 lengths back in the dirt routes or 1.1.5 adjusted. Wire to wire winners in turf routes, 1 of 23, only 4% in the last 7 years, 0 of 8 at Del Mar in turf routes. A little bit surprising to me, but that's just what the numbers bore out. Look for stalking types with speed and late kick or finishing ability. Again, not many wire to wire winners, so sitting, maybe mid pack. Again, 4 lengths, maybe 3 lengths off the leaders early with some late kick and that finishing ability that you typically want to see in turf routes. So now I'm kind of going to compare Del Mar specifically to the other Breeders' Cup races, dirt sprints. The Breeders' Cup winners tend to be closer to the front end at Del Mar than other tracks, about a half length closer at the half mile pole in dirt sprints. At Del Mar, the first 2 quarter miles are on par with the average Breeders' Cup times, so the time's about the same. Only 1 wire-to-wire winner in the last 7 years and none at Del Mar. Dirt routes, comparing and contrasting Del Mar to the other Breeders' Cup races or other Breeders' Cup tracks. Breeders' Cup winners tend to be slightly closer to the front end at Del Mar than other tracks, about 0.15 lengths, 0.37 adjusted at the half mile pole, so pretty much on par, but slightly closer at Del Mar. The first 3/4 of a mile are on par again with the Breeders' Cup average time, so this dirt track seems to play very much like the other tracks that have hosted the Breeders' Cup. 4 of 9 or 44% wire-to-wire winners at Del Mar versus 6 of 25 or 24% elsewhere. So wire-to-wire winners in dirt routes seem to have better chances at Del Mar than the other tracks. Looking at turf sprints, the Breeders' Cup winners tend to be on par at Del Mar than other tracks in terms of their margin, 0.06 lengths back at the half mile or 3/8 pole, so within pretty much the on par, like I said. The first 2/4 miles are slightly slower at Del Mar than the Breeders' Cup average, half second slower and 0.33 seconds slower for the second quarter. Due to the slower fractions, these races tend to slow down less than other Breeders' Cup turfs. These slow down about 0.2 seconds in that second quarter, where other tracks 0.9 seconds. So horses seem to maintain their speed at Del Mar. Again, they're going a little bit slower early, slightly slower early, but they seem to maintain their speed throughout the race at Del Mar. Wire-to-wire winners at Del Mar, 2 of 5, 40%, are on slightly lower than other Breeders' Cup tracks, 4 of 8, 50%, but still notable. So wire-to-wire winners do happen at all Breeders' Cup tracks in the turf sprints. Now taking a look at turf routes, the Breeders' Cup winners tend to be slightly closer at Del Mar than other tracks, about just over 1 length or 0.4 lengths adjusted at the half mile pole. 1 length closer, that is, than the other Breeders' Cup tracks. The first 3/4 of a mile are slightly slower at Del Mar than the Breeders' Cup average, just slightly. These races tend to slow down slightly more than other Breeders' Cup turf route. This turf course, maybe for whatever reason, horses just run a little bit slower around it, especially in the routes. No wire-to-wire winners at Del Mar, 0 of 8, but only 1 of 15, 4% at other Breeders' Cup tracks, which is notable. You would think with turf, it might be favoring to some speed, but in these Breeders' Cup races, 0 for 8 at Del Mar, 1 for 15 elsewhere. Now, just some of my overall takeaways. Lowest split between the first 2/4 miles. So basically races that were run pretty evenly throughout turf sprints. Greatest split between the first 2/4 miles were those turf routes. Lowest average win odds were on the dirt sprints. Highest average win odds were on the turf sprints. Race types with most wire-to-wire winners, dirt routes, although it was close between dirt routes and turf sprints. Race types with the least wire-to-wire wins, dirt sprints and turf routes, both were won for about 20. Race types with the smallest margin at the half-mile pole, so which races were the winners closest to the front end of the race, dirt sprints and dirt routes, about the same. And race types with the highest margin at the half-mile pole were turf routes, so biggest closers in the turf routes and just stalking the pace, dirt sprints and routes. So those are my overall takeaways. Again, it is something to think about before actually handicapping the Breeders' Cup races. Been listening to a lot of podcasts talking about a lot of horses, but we don't know post positions yet. Again, if anyone wants to ask for the file, I'll try to post it in the description below. But that's just my food for thought for the Breeders' Cup coming up at Del Mar, and I wish you all luck. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.